I get to introduce our fabulous speaker tonight, Kendra St. Charles. You read slightly about her bio. She is also, I can say, a lifelong resident of Akron, has a special place in her heart for the burn unit at Children's Hospital and has done a lot of work to support the good things that go on over there, and is a friend and relative of a number of people associated with RMH within our family already. So it's about time that she has worked her way here. Kendra will be sharing her story about surviving a plane crash and how that's changed how the world looks to her and how she views and lives her life. So we're very excited to introduce Kendra, and I'm switching over to IT mode, and I hope it all works. And thanks so much for coming, you guys, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you all for having me here tonight. Have you ever had an event in your life that you experienced something that changed the course that you were on? Perhaps the death of a loved one, loss of a job, maybe a divorce? My journey started on March 22nd, 1992. I was a single mother. My daughter Tracy was 16 at the time, and I wore two hats. I was a mom first and foremost, and being a single mother with an only child, it was really important for me to make sure that my daughter had all the things that other kids had. I didn't have brothers or sisters that she didn't have them, but I did everything I could to give her that family life. And then the other hat that I put on was a single working mother. And I really juggled the best I could trying to do that. I came from a restaurant family, and I think I was a little protected in that family, but going out into the business world was a whole new thing for me. But I got a job as an independent contractor. I sold eyeglass frames to eye doctors. And after about 5 or 6 years, I was starting to get the hang of it, and my hard work was starting to pay off, and I got to see some of the financial rewards that came with that, as well as being invited to a trade show to represent my company in New York City. I had the opportunity to go and be with all the successful reps from all over the country. So the reps from New York City, from Washington, D.C., from Boston, were going to be at this 3-day event. So I think I did what most women would do. I immediately went out and bought 3 new suits. Because I didn't want them to think we didn't know how to dress from the Midwest. So I bought the suits, I bought the purses, I bought the shoes, the scarves, the whole 9 yards. I was going to be prepared. The truth of the matter is I would have rather have been home in my blue jeans with my Cleveland Browns or Cavaliers t-shirt, but I had to show them that I could do it. So I went there, worked hard. I was fortunate enough that I was able to go to dinner too during the evening. Happened to have one of your volunteers, board members, Mary Yanko, who's my cousin. She was there at the time. We were able to have dinner with some other friends from Akron. So it really was a busy 3 days. Tracy was staying at home. My brother Kevin was there with her, so I knew she was taken care of. But regardless, I was anxious to get home. After about the 3rd day, I was really ready to go. My feet hurt, and it was just time to leave. But it had been a good show. I got to really stand toe-to-toe with those other reps and felt pretty good about the position I was in. The day that I was coming home was on Sunday. We'd flown into New York City, LaGuardia's busy, busy airport, and it was time to go home now. And as I left the trade show, I said goodbye to all my coworkers and reflected on what a good time it had been, and I really was pleased with everything. And there was another rep that was leaving at the same time. Her name was Sally Stewart, so we shared a cab to the airport. And we both remarked about the weather. It had started to snow. And as you know, March in Cleveland can be a little dicey. So I was more concerned about coming home. But as I got to the airport, the cab ride, you could see the snow increase, and it was really getting to be a blizzard. By the time Sally and I got to the airport, we were on the same flight. We noticed that it had been delayed. And we were supposed to leave at 5:30 in the evening. And I made a couple phone calls home, talked to Tracy, Told her I'd be late coming home. Told Kevin not to stay. It was okay. You know, she'd be all right. But, and I'd wake Tracy up in the morning and tell her all about the trade show, but it was going to be late by the time I got home. Finally, around 9 o'clock, we were told we could board. And I boarded the plane, and as I went to sit in my assigned seat, I noticed that there was a man sitting there. So I did what all good girls from Akron, Ohio do. I had to ask the flight attendant, where should I sit? She said, you can sit wherever you want. We've got some empty spaces. So I sat next to Sally at the window. And we sat there for a while, and it was snowing and snowing and snowing, and they de-iced the airplane. And I said to her afterwards, I said, you could see in the windows that the little ice crystals were forming on the windows as quickly as they had de-iced. And I remember saying to her, surely they're not going to let us take off if it's not safe. And she said to me, do you want to switch seats? You want to sit in the aisle? And the truth of the matter is, I didn't care where I sat. I just wanted to get home. So I switched with her. I recall, finally, we were told we could take off. The pilot came on and said, we're 8th in line. And we all knew it wasn't going to be right away. If you're 8th in line, you're going to wait for a while. But finally, after being de-iced a second time, we were scheduled to take off. The plane engines roared. We started down the runway. We got about 40 feet up in the air when the plane visibly began to shake. And it banked to the left, it banked to the right, and then we did a severe flip going over. And I was sitting on the left side of the plane. The left wing hit a storage unit as we were coming down. I remember the people screaming. I remember the overhead bins opening and suitcases and all kinds of clothing were flying all over. And I did, just by instinct, grab my wrist with one hand and bent down, almost to get like in a crash position, I'm assuming. And the next thing I remember was being ejected through this hole where the wing had been ripped off, where the fireball was all over, thrown through that. I must have been unconscious at the time that I hit the water, and I didn't know where I was. I remember waking up underneath the water, and the seat acted as a flotation device. You know how they always tell you that before you get ready to take off? But it had me pinned upside down. So here I am, 9:30 at night, in water, which I didn't even know there was water around the airport, being held underneath, almost drowning. And fortunately was able to unbuckle my seatbelt, come up to the top of the water. It was only about 3 feet tall, and all I saw were flames. I was literally in a sea of flames. And I remember pushing the baggage away, pushing the lavatory door was in my way, and I saw the lights of the runway. And I thought, if I can get there, I'm going to be okay. But in between that, it was fire. It was every time the winds would shift, it would ignite the jet fuel that was laying on top. So it was almost like being what I would assume is a war zone with hand grenades just going off all around. So my hands were burnt, and my face was burnt, and I was almost going to freeze to death or drown. But those lights from the runway are what guided me through.
I was about 2 minutes out of headquarters. I was on the highway when I heard the police harbor unit put the job over the PD radio that they had witnessed the plane crash and the plane was in the water and it was on fire. The first thought that came to my mind is, I didn't hear right, this can't be. And then when they started screaming again, I said, oh my God, this is it.
What I couldn't believe is that anybody walked away from this plane. You know, you're looking at this and saying, it's unbelievable anybody walked out. And, you know, with that in mind, you say if people walked out, there might still be people alive in here. So you have to give it your 100% and all your effort into doing just that.
When I first got down onto the shoreline, I figured there couldn't be any survivors. The wreckage that I saw and the fire, I just thought it was, I was preparing myself to start stepping over numerous casualties who didn't make it, bodies, and but then I saw these people moving around, so it lifted my spirits greatly, and I felt, well, we can really do some help here now and get these people out.
What happened to U.S. Air Flight 405 on takeoff from LaGuardia Airport last month? Initial investigation reports have placed some blame on the icy conditions on the wings of the Fokker F-28, but the full investigation continues. The Cleveland-bound flight with 51 aboard veered left on takeoff, burst into flames, and landed in the 40-degree waters of Flushing Bay. Port Authority officials, police officers, firefighters, and paramedics raced to the scene to begin rescue efforts. But responders, including air medical helicopters, had difficulty reaching the crash because of the blinding snow, and emergency apparatus got snagged in a massive traffic jam around the airport. First responders said they didn't think anyone could have survived the fireball of the crash and the plane being submerged in Flushing Bay. The thick black smoke made it difficult to see anything. All told, 27 people, including the captain and one flight attendant, died in the crash. 24 survived. Many of those injured in the crash waded through the frigid waters to safe ground as rescuers arrived. Responders said it was almost dreamlike in the way passengers emerged from the wreckage in the darkness of night with snow coming down heavily. Trying to get to the interior of the fuselage, firefighters built a bridge from ladders to get through the gaping hole in the top of the plane, and also used ladders to climb the steep embankment that separated them from the jet. Harbor Patrol and dive rescue units pulled survivors from the water minutes after the crash and continued their search attempts. The location of the crash, the freezing waters, and the blinding snowstorm hampered the efforts. Between the time of the crash at 9:34 p.m. and 2 a.m., emergency workers searched the wreckage and the waters for survivors and bodies. The search had to be suspended at 2 a.m. because of the tide coming in. They resumed the next morning and removed the last body at 7:30 p.m. that evening. Rescue personnel had to be rehabbed and monitored for fatigue, hypothermia, and stress throughout the incident. And as the investigation continues, those involved are critiquing their response, which is being called nothing short of heroic.
"27 people died that night. I was one of 24 that survived. The man sitting in my assigned seat and Sally that was sitting next to me died that night. I had to fight for my life in that water. I had to get myself out of the seat belt. I had to dodge the flames. The trauma had cracked 6 of my ribs. One of those ribs punctured my right lung. But I just kept thinking, I got to get to those lights. I've got to get help. Once I get there, I'll get help. There are rocks surrounding the water and the runway, from the runway. I crawled on those. I remember they were jet fuel. They were slippery. It was icy. And I looked down. I could see all I had on was a peach bra. And all I could think of was, you know how my mother always told me to make sure I wear clean underwear. At least my mom was going to be happy, so I was glad about that. Then I just wanted to get warm. Most of my clothes had been ripped off from the jagged edges of this aircraft. I got within about 5 or 10 feet from a man that was on the same rocks. And I said to him, "I'm so cold." He must have been another survivor, although I've never been able to find him. And he said, "Just lean on me and you'll be okay." He yelled for help. I went to yell for help. And at that time, my one lung collapsed and I passed out. My next recollection was the paramedics putting me on a gurney, wrapping me up with warm blankets because I kept saying, "I'm so cold, I'm so cold." They covered my eyes. They were afraid my eyes had been burned. I remember them slipping and sliding on the gurney to get me to the hospital. And once I got to the hospital, they knew I was in pretty critical condition. I'd sustained 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree burns, but my serious injury was my lung. I wasn't breathing. So the emergency room doctor had to try to get me to give him my name because I had no ID, I had no purse, I barely had any clothes. And I was able to do that. I didn't know that what he was going to do with that and my phone number was to call my daughter Tracy. Thankfully, he did that. He called Tracy, he said, "I've got your mom here, she's alive, I need to talk to your dad." My ex-husband and I had been divorced for quite a few years. He lived in Michigan, Tracy was in Fairlawn. And so he called Paul and said, "I have your wife here," not knowing. He said, "I need you to get the family and get to New York as quickly as you can. I don't know how long I can keep her alive." So Paul and Tracy and my two brothers, my family, came into New York to the hospital the following morning. But before they saw me, they met with the doctor's staff and a social worker. And the doctors informed them of my critical condition. They'd had to intubate me in order for me to live. And they wanted to prepare them for the sight they were going to see. And the social worker said to Paul, "Now, you need to try to keep her calm." That was his job. She suggested that he try to do everything he could to keep me calm. So when they came into my room, I still remember Tracy looking over me and just that shock, that horror, that fear. And Paul was standing over me, looking over, and he said, "Now, honey, don't worry about a thing. I'll take good care of Tracy." And I thought, well, he thinks I'm going to die. And then I thought, oh my God, he can't take care of a dog. How's he going to take care of my princess? So when people say, "Why do you think you lived?" There's no magical reason. It's because Paul couldn't take care of Tracy. So I just knew I had to get busy. I had to get busy. So after 3 days of being on a ventilator and having the second best hospital staff around, they were able to wean me off the ventilator and tend to my burns. I stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks in New York City. I went into a hotel for a couple days following that before they'd discharged me to come back to Akron. And one of the reasons that they allowed me to come back that quickly, they said, is because we had the second finest burn unit, they said, in the country. Well, I knew once I got home, if I had any problems, I was to go to the burn unit at Children's. And that's when I became aware of what a job that they do at the burn unit, not only for children, but for adults. So we're very blessed to have that too. But I thought when I got home that everything would be normal again. When I was in the hospital the last time and met with the burn unit physician, the head of the burn unit, Dr. Goodwin, he came into my hospital room and I was crying. And he said, "Kendra, what can we do for you? What can we get you?" And I said, "I just want to go home. I just want to go home." Because I knew when I came home, I would have the support of my family and friends. And I thought everything would be fine again. But it was like I had a puzzle, and the puzzle at the time of the crash went up in the air. And all the puzzle pieces, when they came back down, they didn't fit. But I came home to an incredible community that I feel so blessed to be a part of. Before I left the hospital, the burn unit nurses and doctors made me a scrub with my name on it, and they each signed it, and it was my birthday. I celebrated my 40th birthday on the burn unit, not knowing if I was going to live or die. So they tried to make it as festive as they could, but very blessed. I still have that today. Those small acts of kindness along the way have been so important in my healing process. I am truly blessed. What I never expected to come home to were cards from strangers, from family members that I didn't even know I had, that people that took the time to send me a card that gave me words of encouragement and hope and just let me feel the love. And that is something that I will always, always appreciate about this community. I don't have to tell all of you, because that's what you do every day that you're at Ronald McDonald, is give those small tokens of appreciation and warmth and love and consideration. I got to feel that. I truly did, and I know I'm blessed. So after, about a year, I was able to go back to work full-time. It took me a while, and I went back for part-time. But I always had those cards. to look on when I had a bad day. And those words of encouragement helped me get out of bed. And that, with family and friends, was the reason I was able to start back to the healing process. And physically, I got stronger. Mentally, I got stronger. But I also had to see a therapist. I had nightmares. I didn't want to leave the house. I'd been in the hospital. I was used to people bringing me my food. Now I couldn't cut my food. I had someone to cut it for a while. But as I continued to heal physically, the nightmares didn't stop, but they got less and less, and I was very grateful about that. About 2 years after my crash, I got a call from some people in Pittsburgh. And I was pretty good about then. By then I thought, I'm going to get on with my life because all I wanted was it to be normal again. I wanted those pieces of the puzzle to fit again, and I wanted to put my Cavalier t-shirt on. I wanted them to win. They were in the playoffs that year too. But I wanted to get on with my life. I wasn't going to have this experience define me. It was always going to be there. And part of the rawness of seeing your death almost imminent was me really feeling it with my heart and knowing how precious life was. But I got a call 2 years after there was a crash in Pittsburgh where everybody was killed. It was one of those horrific crashes, US Air 427, where everybody was killed. And there were so many people, so many wives that were left without a spouse. There were children that were left without their fathers because there were a lot of businessmen on that flight. And they were calling me, asking me what they could expect, what it was like. And I thought, well, this is strange. I'm surprised they're calling me. They had found my name because Regina Brett from the Beacon Journal had written an article about me. And they picked it up, so that's how they were able to get my name. They wanted some of their loved ones' personal effects back. They wanted their husband's watch or a wedding ring, keys, a briefcase, T-shirt, whatever that was on that last flight, they wanted back. And they were really having a hard time getting that. They had some real solid questions. And they asked me if I would come over to Pittsburgh and speak to their family group. It was in January, and I remember driving my car over to Pittsburgh thinking, I can't believe I'm going to the Steelers country, first of all. and then I thought, I got to get it beyond this. I feel good. I'm back to work. I can laugh again. I can cry again. And I just need to just let this go. I got over to Pittsburgh. I talked to families. I'd never spoken in front of a group before. I thought this is just craziness, but I did the best I could, and afterwards there was a young girl that came to me, and she said, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you coming here. And she went on to tell me that her father had been killed in the crash. And I asked her how old she was, and she was exactly my daughter's age. And so I said on the way home, all right, this is the deal, but by the grace of God go I. I'm so lucky to be here. I will do whatever you want me to do and be the messenger. But that little girl really affected me in a very profound way. So it was another act of kindness that I was very grateful for. But we realized that with the Pittsburgh family, then there were 5 crashes. They called it 5 and 5. US Air had 5 crashes in 5 years. And regardless of what the crash, there's a American Eagle had a crash, TWA, Value Jet, and another US Air crash. So regardless of what the situation or the airline was, there was always a problem with personal effects, notification. Nobody called Tracy. She was able to, the doctor called her. But there were some industry issues about people in plane crashes not getting the same support that you would expect them to get. So we got the group of the families from these plane crashes together and talked to Chairman Hall, who was the NTSB chair at the time, and told him of our concerns. And he got to see it firsthand because the couple days before our meeting with him was before the TWA crash. So once that happened, he could see that all the concerns we had were valid concerns that needed to be addressed. I was asked to then go forward, and I testified in front of the Congress on what I felt the needs of survivors and family members who lose loved ones are. And the whole time I remember being in Washington, D.C. thinking, I wonder what my grandparents are thinking about me coming from Akron, Ohio, and testifying in front of Congress really for the other people too. I was their voice. I survived. I could tell how awful it was. And I had the ear of a lot of people in Washington, D.C., and for that I was very grateful. After we got the legislation passed, I was appointed to the task force. President Clinton appointed me to the task force. In our job, there were 22 members. I was the only survivor. There were 4 family members that lost loved ones. And the others were people from government, people from Red Cross, and some of the other agencies. The airline was represented as well. And we met once a month for 9 months. I flew from Cleveland into DC and gave them my opinion on how we were going to make the law and give the families the support that they needed, whether it was emotional, what their rights were and what they could do. And part of the reason was the airline wasn't prepared. They didn't feel that they were going to have a crash, and they said that. So the law mandated that they had to have a plan in effect. They had to have training, and they had to be prepared in the case of an accident. And I'm very blessed and feel so proud of the work that we did to get that done. And it's because of the task force that that's done. It stands today that any airline that flies into the United States or even over the United States has to have a plan in place. They have to be prepared what they're going to do with a 16-year-old little girl who's sitting at home not knowing if her mom's going to live or die. So that was a really big event for me, and I'm really proud of that event. But I also found that I derived a great deal of healing through helping. And that's what I've also started to really talk about, that there's so much that you can do, and there's so many little things that you can do that we take for granted, that we never know what's going to really affect somebody else. Just a couple of years ago, I'd worked with the commercial airlines at the time of the legislation, but the corporate aviation was not really affected by this. They aren't under the law, but they still wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to have their employees trained to know what to do in the event of a crash. So I was asked to go down to Columbus to speak with airline employees on what the needs of survivors and family members were. And we'd been in training all day with the airline folks. And there was one man that wasn't terribly engaged in our conversation. And at the end of the day, I asked if anyone had a question. And a couple people did, and he put up his hand. And he said, I just want you to know, he said, I worked for US Air at the time of your accident. And I thought, oh boy. And he said, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but he said US Air had just bought 3 airlines, and we were trying to merge 3 other airlines under the US Air umbrella. He said they all came from different cultures, there were different protocols, different procedures. He said it was a very difficult time for us at US Air. And then he said, and I am so sorry for what you went through. And I think you can see in that picture the human connection. I said to him, in the 20 years since my crash, you are the first and only person from US Air to tell me you're sorry. There wasn't a dry eye in that room. The connection between human beings is what it's all about, I've learned. To me, that was the most important lesson that I could learn throughout this. 20 years later, those little words meant so much to me. I've also learned that it's those small acts of kindness along the way, whether it was the burn unit nurse that combed my hair the first time after being in that dirty water and my hair was burnt, she took care of me. One of the first times I flew, I got off the plane because, of course, I had to tell the pilot. Back then, you could stop and talk in the cockpit. And I told the pilot that I was really nervous, and the reason I was nervous was because I was in this plane crash. And he gave me his full attention. And as I deplaned then, he got off with me and tried to explain why our plane crashed, and that the kind of wing that we had in our aircraft was very susceptible to ice. Can you imagine trying to explain to me the technical part of the de-icing? But he did, God bless him, and I will always remember that. And the time and the effort and the fear it must have been for this man to say, I'm sorry. I mean, those are such big steps to me, and I will always cherish what those people did and keep them in my heart forever. I've learned that we all have our own crashes, whether they're personal or financial. But if we can't help one another during these darkest times, to me, that's what it's all about. And I know you all get it. It's because you do this all the time. Whether it's a cookie or the warmth, the comfort, the safe haven that you allow the family members to experience at Ronald McDonald. I thank you for your service. Each and every one of you gives so much to so many. I am so proud to call Akron my home because I'm a part of your community. Thank you.